Hello, I'm Tony Guida. Welcome to My New York. Food is on my mind today. Well, food is on my mind most of the time. But anyway, you know that New York is a cornucopia of cuisines. And if you like to dine out, your palate can be pampered in a galaxy of fine restaurants.
A real restaurateur who's somebody who lives it, and breathes it, and eats it every day, having worked from the bottom up.
That is Drew Nieporent, and he is one of New York's finest restaurateurs. You will meet him next. I'm delighted to welcome to the program Drew Nieporent, the owner of the Myriad Restaurant Group, which to you folks means Nobu and Bâtard and the eternal Tribeca Grill, right, which goes on and on and on. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Tony. It's good to be here.
Those words of yours that we started with, that a restaurateur lives it and breathes it and works it from the bottom up, you know, I recognize you were compacting thoughts, for an announcement. But if you pardon the pun, put some meat on those bones. What does that mean?
Because I grew up in the 60s, and my mother was an actress. And my mother gave us this, she was a child actress. Actually, before television, she was on radio. And she had a tremendous work ethic. And, of course, it was like most mothers, whatever you decide to do, you're going to do it to the best of your ability, and you're going to really be, you're going to research it and become knowledgeable about it. So my father worked for the State Liquor Authority. They licensed restaurants. And this is the 60s. Most of these restaurants in New York were authentic immigrants right off the boat, if you will. And they were so appreciative of what my father did for them, which essentially was taking the application from the bottom of the pile, putting it on the top of the pile so they could get to work, that they would invite him and the family to eat in these restaurants. So I had this tremendous exposure as a very young person to the great restaurants of New York. And then I realized it was something I wanted to do, and therefore I went to work at becoming, that was going to be, I knew at the earliest age, that's what I was going to do. And
that's a terrific inspiration. I mean, to be, when we think back to the restaurants of those days, some classics and some wonderful places, both, outstanding at the top of cuisine, or even, ordinary places that,
there was a place called Al Green's on the corner of 56th and 6th. And I remember looking at the menu, and at various parts of the menu were the same items, but they were different prices. And I was like, I asked the guy one day, why do you have different prices? He said, because we charge the highest price because nobody's really looking. Like you learn the shtick.
Right.
There was a place down in Wall Street called the Camlet, which was just a speakeasy. And at lunch, these guys were drinking. And I watched the guy, and they say, Shelley, let us buy you a drink. And they go, Remy Martin. So now this is years later. I graduate. I go down to see Shelley. I go, how could you drink Remy Martin like that at lunchtime? He says to the bartender, pass the bottle of Remy, pours it. It was iced tea. So all these years, those big shots were buying him $12 shots of iced tea.
I thought it might be he picked the most expensive liqueur, since they're buying it.
Exactly. But but these are things. Now, I also
tricks
was
of
eating
the trade. We're learning tricks of the trade.
I was also eating at Le Pavillon, Café Argenteuil, the greatest French restaurants. So the point is I had this tremendous exposure. I had to do something with it. And therefore, I went to the School of Hard Knocks, which is getting work experience. I actually worked at a McDonald's on 23rd Street in 1972. Great.
Flipping hamburgers?
I was, quarter pounders. When I was 18, I was on a cruise ship, the MS Vistafjord, sailing to Russia, all over Scandinavia, as a waiter on a 600-passenger cruise liner, a veritable football field, and, learning to carry a tray like this. So I believe in terms of, I walk the walk and I talk the talk when it comes to restaurants and food.
I'm interested in the roots of a very successful restaurateur. And walking the walk and talking the talk, what does that mean in a daily, on a daily basis? I mean, in your routine, your daily routine.
Well, I mean, first, I was growing up in a rich period of time in New York. The 60s was immensely interesting, and I had heroes like Muhammad Ali saying, "I am the greatest, make no mistake about that." Cosell and that whole thing. So being the best at what you do, being at the top of the heap. So when I graduated from Stuyvesant High School in New York, and I got into Cornell Hotel School. And what I realized was I was going to need to supplement my education because the theoretical didn't work for me. I needed the on-hands.
Well, as you say, you had you were attending the School of Hard Knocks, but you were also attending one of the finest schools for this field that there is.
Right. But the school, interestingly enough, doesn't graduate many people who do what I do. They mostly become consultants or hoteliers, and very few become restaurateurs. So every day, even today, the world, my world, is surrounded by food. Number one, I've already stopped in the Four Seasons to say hello to Julian Nicolini, who's one of the great restaurateurs, because I was in the neighborhood. And I'll always read something. And, of course, we have the benefit of the world is our oyster now, to be able to read something about food. There are these sites that keep you up to date about the new restaurants opening and things like that. So I have to stay cutting edge. Why? Because I still have restaurants that have operated for 25 years in the case of Tribeca Grill, or as many as 30 years, because I opened my first restaurant in 1985, the Bâtard restaurant, which I reconcepted a year ago, just won Best Restaurant in America, James Beard. So for me, even though I just turned 60, I still get a kick out of the daily routine and basically learning something every day and sharing that with my staff. Later today, I'll be down at the restaurant at 5 o'clock, right before we open. We go over who's coming in, what they mean to this restaurant, what they mean as people in New York City.
That's what I'm interested in. In the nickels and dimes, if you will, of the daily routine, how does your inspiration and your desire to be the best play out? It's looking over the reservations for that night. It's looking at the glassware, at the silverware, at the kitchen.
Largely, Tony, it's going to be food, because I'm so fortunate that, number one, I decided to make Tribeca, the neighborhood of Tribeca, sort of my little enclave. So I have the majority of my restaurants sit in a easy radius for me to walk around and jump in.
Well, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say you had a lot to do with putting Tribeca on the map.
I think we had a little something to do with that. And what's great for me, of course, is that I'm still all about the food. The food at the end of the day is the most important thing. So you have to keep your eye on the ball, and you have to make sure that the people who are working in your restaurant see that you still care. You care for the product, but you care for them.
So it's an eye on the food, not only in what you're getting supplied, what's coming into the kitchen, but how it's going out of the kitchen, how it's being prepared.
We're making music every day, and when we talk about making music, whoever is playing the instrument has to listen to the other people to know when they're going to play, if they're going to play together. So for me, I think what's important is I don't have to make myself the most important element of what we do. What's important is our longevity. What's important is what we contribute to New York City every single day. I feel very satisfied that my generation changed New York in a way that gave food its sort of street cred. New York has always been known as a cultural center of many things, and we've always had a lot of restaurants, but suddenly, over the last 30 years, let's just say, food became very topical, very upfront, and where you eat is almost as important as what you wear, or where you stay, or what shows you're going to visit. Right. And the only way you do that is, you just have to you stay engaged.
Food and the credibility you gave it is certainly evident from the first restaurant 30 years ago, Montrachet in Tribeca. And I'm wondering, you've been describing your inspiration, you've been describing your early work experiences, and, McDonald's and a cruise line and a couple of, I think you were a Tavern on the Green.
I worked at right in the Central Park.
Maxwell's Plum. Right. None of those places, none of those experiences were I'm not a food critic, but I wouldn't say that was about really fine food. And yet, the first restaurant you open, Montrachet in Tribeca,
We got 3 stars.
Gets 3 stars 7 weeks after it's open. How did that happen?
Well, actually, that's a good story because I had worked, and I was working leading up to the opening of Montrachet. I was working at La Grenouille, which is still open on 52nd Street.
That's better food.
And, what happened was I was building Montrachet, and one day phone rang. They said, "You're not going to believe who just came in. Brian Miller, the food critic of the New York Times, just came in." I said, "This is La Grenouille." I said, "What name did he book the reservation under?" And they said, "Benson." I said, "Do me a favor. The next time you have a Benson on the book, call me up." I bring my tuxedo to the construction site of Montrachet. Sure enough, about 2 weeks later, Drew, we have a Benson for lunch. Dressed the tuxedo. E-Train, which was right on the corner of West Broadway where my restaurant was going to be, 52nd Street. Literally walk into La Grenouille. Everyone's looking at me. "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be working." I wanted to see what the guy looked like. And then, this is hilarious, but as he's leaving, I had a little camera. And it was in the wintertime, and I kneel behind a car, and I start taking pictures, and then he's walking back to the New York Times. And I followed him to 43rd Street, and I have about 20 pictures of the back of Brian Miller. I don't have one shot. But anyway, fast forward now, I open Montrachet, I'm stocking the wine, I'm doing all these things. Phone rings. "Hi, we'd like to come at 8 o'clock tonight. I'm very sorry, I don't have 8 o'clock available. I can take you at 6:15. What is the name, please?" He says, "Benson." I said, "Oh, could you hold on one moment?" And I go, "I can take you at 8 o'clock. I think we're going to have a cancellation. So so now, I'm pretty sure he's going to be coming in." I call my mother, and I put my mother to the table to his left. I put best friends to my table to the right.
Papered the house.
Papered the house. He comes in with his wife of the time. And at some point, my friends go out for a smoke, and I run outside. I said, "So what is he saying?" And she goes, "Damn this thing, they're speaking French." So now, the New York Times food critics come 3 times. And anyway, the bottom line is, and I readily admit it, I did not want to read my obituary. And to this day, I make it my business to know who the powers are that eat and write about food. And I've done pretty well in the media because, as you know, Tony, being part of the media, you either are controlled, and sometimes not in a good way, and it's very rare, unless you're Donald Trump, that you can control the media in a certain way that it works. What I would say is, how crazy is it? This is about food. Yeah, I got 3 stars. In 1985, I was serving a $16 menu for 3 courses, and I could have filled Shea Stadium after that review. It was a $1 million review, and it was a little bit like winning the lottery without being able to collect the cash. In other words, I knew I had to. Now the work began, and that's 22 years later. That restaurant existed for 22 years.
Yeah.
And now you go
with 3-star rating most of that time.
Most of the time.
And that's what I'm interested in, Drew. You talked about you were building Montrachet. You had this concept for a restaurant. Was the concept for a French restaurant?
It was because but it was for like a Crazy Eddie French restaurant.
Yeah, well, it was.
My prices are insane. It's like I wanted to make sure that I could deliver that quality for literally a third the price.
And in an atmosphere, I had many memorable meals at Montrachet, in an atmosphere that was low-key, informal,
unpretentious.
Unpretentious. Place was funky, and in a good way. And the food was superb.
Right.
So you had the concept. How do you make that into reality? How do you find the chef that's going to...
What I realize is, my mother, who was an actress, later in life became a casting director. What do? They find the right person to play the role. So my job is to be able to identify who is a better chef, who's a better manager. When you open a restaurant, what's the most important thing you do? You're casting that restaurant. And if you put the wrong person in the wrong role, guess what? It's going to not be very good. So, I don't know if that's genetics or if I just watched my mother's Sybil Trent. If I watched that, but I certainly learned that it was the most important thing was my choice of who was going to work. And who was the first chef at Montrachet? David Boulay. But unfortunately...
Funny name. I think we've heard of him.
He did pretty good in his career also.
A few things.
So, I mean, it all is about experience. That, you have to have professional knowledge, and then you need the confidence in what you know. That's walk the walk and talk the talk. The confidence is very important because we're on a daily basis trying to inspire the people we work with. If they think you're full of hot air, they're not going to follow what you say. More and more, by the way, I'm full of hot air. But as I get older, I realize nobody listens to me anymore anyway. But I think the proof is in the pudding,
sure,
so to speak.
Well,
Nobu, I mean, listen, there is no greater restaurant in the world than what we did with Nobu. Because in 1994, it's hard to remember that far back, but in New York, the Japanese restaurants were only for the Japanese. They really didn't want to be homogenized with the rest of New York.
Well, I want a creation story about Nobu, but one more question about Montrachet.
Okay.
You decided to put this restaurant, your first shot. Now, you have a lifelong ambition to, from your teen years, excuse me, your teen years, to be a restaurateur. You get into the business, you're working in the business, you're working at ham and egg places, you're working at some of the finest places. And then, but you're going to open a restaurant. You're going to open a restaurant. And early in your 30s, you're going to open this place, Montrachet.
29.
In 29.
Yeah.
Okay. Good for you.
That was good.
You're a young man. This is your first shot out of the box. And you're going to put it in Tribeca? Nobody had ever heard of Tribeca.
Okay,
Tribeca was the Wild West.
By the way, this is a simple answer. It was what I could afford.
Okay.
In other words, in 1983, when I was working at all those French restaurants midtown, I sort of had a come to Jesus moment because I didn't want to open a French restaurant. I wanted to open an American restaurant, and there wasn't a lot of those. In other words, we're in America, but nobody was talking about American food. Maybe Larry Forgione, maybe Jonathan Waxman started that movement. So I was inspired by a trip to the wine country in California, and I've made wine a fairly large component of my career also. But the original name I had was the Silverado Trail, which is in the Napa Valley.
I know it well.
And then I'm working one night at La Grenouille, and I'm pouring this amazingly expensive French Burgundy called Montrachet, and I'm looking at this, and it's like glowing in the at me, and I'm saying, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. I'm just going to do what I think the people want, which is another great French restaurant, but inexpensive. Now, I might want to live on Park Avenue. I can't afford the rent. When I had run the New York Marathon in 1983 while I was a captain at these places, because between lunch and dinner I would go to run the loop in Central Park. Anyway, the point is, I would jog in Tribeca, and there was nobody there. And part of the adventure of dining back then was finding out of the way hideaways, little places nobody had ever heard of. And so for me, when I was jogging one day and I see this location, I was like,
West Broadway.
It was 1,500 square feet for $1,500 a month. That's $50 a day. That was the rent.
Wow.
And
it's hard to imagine something like that existed in New York. I mean, even
$12 a foot. $12 a foot. But that neighborhood, I mean, there was nothing there.
So were you worried? I mean, yes, on the one hand, it's what you can afford. On the other hand, are you saying to yourself, who the hell is going to come down here?
Well, let's put it this way. We did 37 covers the first night. Then we did 17. Then I got worried. But what was the most amazing thing I've ever seen was every night, and this is before social media, the word of mouth was spectacular. And you started seeing the most important people in New York, Jeffrey Bean and, Herbie Hancock. And Willie Smith was a great designer and a terrific friend until he passed away. So I knew I had broken some ground, and I had great experience, and the food was amazing. I mean, the food was amazing. And so I think I was confident that I could draw the beast to the hunt.
You had a customer by the name of, what's his name? He's an actor. He's very famous.
Al Pacino? No,
De
my
Niro.
Partner of many years.
De Niro.
Robert De Niro.
And there's a story I think you've told, but you can tell me if this is accurate. He's a customer at Montrachet, and he calls you over the table one night and says, do you want to do another restaurant in Tribeca? I've got money, I'm willing to, and I got friends. Is this...
Well, it's actually, he didn't say a word. It was his girlfriend, Tookie Smith, actually Willie Smith's sister, who was a beautiful model.
Yeah.
And she and Bob were an item. They have children, actually, to this day. But, and she was the one saying, Bob wants to know if you'd like to do another restaurant in Tribeca. And, of course, what I said was, you talking to me because there's nobody else here. You know.
You really quoted the taxi? You should have.
I joke. I tell the story a lot, obviously. But we walked up the block, and we looked at this burnt-out shell of a building. And I tried to get something out of him because Bob is very quiet. And I said, well, what do you want it to be like? And he couldn't really come up with anything. He said, like La Coupole in Paris? He goes, yeah, like La Coupole in Paris. Anyway, the bottom line is, the Tribeca Grill, which we opened together in 1990.
Still there.
Other partners that De Niro brought in, such as Bill Murray, Sean Penn, Mikhail Baryshnikov, Ed Harris, Christopher Walken. Have I dropped enough names? And all that star power, guess what? I mean, my neck was sticking out. I had to deliver the goods. And one of the greatest things I remember after we opened, Tony, was Mimi Sheridan, who had been a food critic for the New York Times before Brian Miller, she never gave anybody any love. She was difficult.
Tough lady.
She's a friend of mine today, and she's still alive, thank God. But she wrote, the Tribeca is so good, the real stars are the chefs, because she went there and the restaurant stood on its own. A lot of these restaurants, like Planet Hollywood, for instance, they had Sylvester Stallone, Bruce Willis, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. We had Robert De Niro. So the rest is history. We're still here 25 years later. I think Planet Hollywood
I'm just curious, being in business, having partners at that list of celebrities you just mentioned. Is that these are people who are often, their life and their career is about themselves. They're very.
Think Sean Penn is difficult?
Are they pains in the butt to have as?
The truth is, when we put this thing together, or when it was bestowed upon me, if you will, I mean, it was breathtaking to be able to sign documents, my name and Bill Murray, or my name. It was unbelievable. And then I worried a little bit about their lawyers and their accountants and their handlers, if you will, their agents. But guess what? 3 years after we were open, we returned 100% of their investment. We're open 25 years now. It's just been...
And they haven't been pains in your neck?
Not at all. I mean, tremendous. Very supportive, great.
Do you go out to restaurants? Do you like to go out to restaurants?
Very much.
I mean, other than your own?
Very much.
And what are you looking for when you go?
The truth is, I used to go out a lot more than I do now, because now I think it's really important to be close to the nest. What's happened in New York is that basically the things that we did, our generation of restaurateurs, has caught on, and now the food has never been better in all parts of the city. Brooklyn, Queens. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yes.
So,
no question.
So it's hard to stay abreast. I mean, I have a list, So, the other night I finally made it out to Bushwick and went to Roberta's, or went to Poke Poke, the Thai restaurant. Right. And so I'm catching up a little bit, but I think it's important. I mean, by the way, our industry, we get along. We like each other. There's not a lot of beefs and things like that. So when you walk into somebody else's restaurant, I think you're paying almost respect in a way. And when they come to my restaurant, that's the way I feel.
When you're not working, if there are any days when you're not working, do you stay away from food, stay away from the kitchen, or do you like to cook?
Tonight actually, I just moved to Piermont, New York, and I got a glorious deck, and I cook. It's a brand new kitchen. I cook. Listen. My lifestyle is food, so everything I do revolves around food. Everything. I mean, last night a friend of mine has a restaurant in Tarrytown, so I checked that out, and for me, every day is a new horizon about food.
Do you have a favorite? I mean, are you known as Drew Nieporent chef or home chef, home cook? known for this dish
certain
or
dishes.
that dish?
Well, for me, the simpler the better. What I find is the perfection of cooking a piece of meat or chicken or even a hamburger is really what I look to do from a cooking standpoint. But I tend to veer to an Italian palate. I like olive oil and garlic and tomatoes and the things and great Parmesan Reggiano. So when I cook, it's pasta and chicken francese and things like that.
And do you have any favorite restaurants that let's say outside?
I love them all, Tony.
You love them all?
No, because, Daniel Boulud is a very dear friend, and his restaurants are spectacular. John George von Gerichten recently was at Le Bernardin. Eric Berry. It's very hard to say a negative word about anything. And now there's a new breed, the Carbone Torrisi guys. They're going to be over at the Four Seasons soon, and,
They are amazing.
Tremendous.
Couple of interesting concepts, Parm and...
Yeah, Santina. I don't know if you've been there yet. I had my birthday there. They've hit the ground running, let's put it that way. They seem to be of the moment. They seem to be of a time in New York right now that they're delivering the goods. And then you have people like Keith McNally, who for years with Balthazar and Minetta Tavern and Pastis, tremendous. Danny Meyer, of course, is spectacular. And also... Stephen Starr came from Philadelphia, and now he's got the Clock Tower. I don't know if you've been there. That's great. Yeah. He opened Upland, tremendously delicious. Sometimes I usually don't get jealous of my competition, but sometimes I go to these restaurants. I'm like, wow, they achieved something I couldn't do. And that's what's interesting.
Drew, it is so delightful to talk food, restaurant, and commitment.
You've always been a great New Yorker, but a real foodie. So
I am a foodie.
Thank you for having me.
We could go on, and I wish we had the time. And I'm going to extend an invitation. You have to come back.
Would love to.
All right. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.